Let's see, according to facts, what civilization was truly the first ever in the world. That's the question that has divided archaeologists, historians, and dreamers for over a century. Textbooks give us one answer, but rival scholars, new discoveries, and even religious traditions all raise their hands with competing claims. Was the first civilization the Sumerians of Mesopotamia, who gave us the earliest written language and city-states? Was it the Egyptians, who raised pyramids so precisely that modern engineers still shake their heads? Was it the Indus Valley people, who planned their cities with mathematical precision yet left behind a script that still mocks our best attempts to read it? Or could it be, as some controversial thinkers argue, that there was once a civilization older than them all, wiped from memory, surviving only in myths of great floods and fallen worlds? The fight begins not with ruins or pottery shards, but with a definition. What does it even mean to call something a civilization? The historian Viff Gordonchill once offered 10 neat boxes that needed to be ticked: permanent cities, organized governments, division of labor, agriculture, writing, trade, social hierarchies, monumental architecture, science, and art. It is a useful checklist, but one that narrows our focus too tightly. When you apply it strictly, Sumer seems to fit best. But if you loosen the definition, suddenly the picture is more complex. Nomadic groups with ritual centers, stone monuments, and cultural influence begin to look like proto-civilizations. Some would even argue that the distinction between civilized and uncivilized is itself a creation of later historians, a hierarchy that ancient peoples never used for themselves. The official story begins in Sumer, in the fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, around 4000 to 3000 BCE. Here we find the first cities that clearly resemble what we call civilization: Uruk, Ur, Eridu. By 3100 BCE, Uruk alone may have housed tens of thousands of people, larger than most medieval European cities, thousands of years later. From clay tablets, we find not only economic records of barley and goats, but also the world's first stories, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the tale of a king who wrestled with mortality and defied the gods. The Sumerians invented cuneiform writing, one of humanity's greatest leaps, pressing wedge-shaped marks into clay tablets that endure to this day. They built ziggurats, towering stepped temples that dominated the skyline, symbols of their belief that the gods lived above and demanded stairways from earth to heaven. They codified laws, with Ur-Nammu writing one of the earliest known legal systems centuries before Hammurabi. They sent merchants with ships along the rivers and out into the Persian Gulf, establishing trade networks that reached far into the Indus Valley and Anatolia. Samuel Noah Kramer, the great Sumerologist, once published a book titled "History Begins at Sumer." He wasn't exaggerating. He listed over 30 firsts that come from Sumer: the first schools, the first proverbs, the first physician, the first farmer's almanac, even the first written complaints about taxes. To many scholars, the case is closed. Civilization began there, and everything else followed. But Egypt raises a counterclaim that refuses to be ignored. Around the same time that Uruk was rising, Egypt was unifying under a single ruler, Nama, around 3100 BCE. The Nile River, unlike the unpredictable Tigris and Euphrates, flooded with remarkable regularity, and this stability allowed Egyptians to build a society that seemed almost designed for eternity. The pyramids of Giza, constructed around 2500 BCE, remain not only marvels of engineering, but also symbols of centralized power, religion, and technological mastery. Egyptian hieroglyphics, many argue, emerged independently of Sumerian writing. Some archaeologists claim that the unification of Egypt into one kingdom makes it deserving, if not more deserving, of the title of the first civilization. If Sumer was first to write, Egypt was first to bind itself under a god-king whose monuments still rise unbroken thousands of years later. And then we come to the Indus Valley, a mystery shrouded in silence. Flourishing between 2300 and 1900 BCE, the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro stretched across an area larger than Sumer and Egypt combined. Their streets were laid out in grids with astonishing precision. They had advanced drainage systems that would not be rivaled until Roman aqueducts 2,000 years later. Their people standardized weights and measures across vast distances, a sign of extraordinary organization. Yet their script remains undeciphered, leaving their voices locked away. Unlike Sumerian or Egyptian kings who carved their names in stone, The Indus Valley left no grand monuments, no massive pyramids, no ziggurats. Instead, they built for function and for collective life. Mortimer Wheeler, one of the early archaeologists of the region, once declared that the Indus Valley represented one of the most consistent and successful ways of life humanity had ever achieved. But since their script cannot be read, they remain overshadowed in history, their wisdom hidden in silence. China, too, steps into the argument. The Xia dynasty, said to have begun around 2000 BCE, may be mythical, but the Shang dynasty by 1600 BCE is indisputable. Bronze technology, oracle bone writing, and complex political structures show that in the East, civilization was flowering just as vibrantly as in the West. Some Chinese historians argue that the Xia predates Sumer itself, though Western historians remain skeptical. The clash is not just about dates, but about national pride and the desire to claim the honor of first. And then comes the wild card, the problem that unsettles the whole neat timeline: Göbekli Tepe. Discovered in Turkey and dated to 9600 BCE, thousands of years before Sumer, it is a site that should not exist. Gigantic stone pillars weighing tons, arranged in circles, carved with animals and abstract symbols. It was not a village, not a farm, not a city. Yet it required planning, labor, and cooperation on a massive scale. Mainstream archaeologists argue that it was a ritual center built by hunter-gatherers, not a true civilization. But the sheer complexity of Göbekli Tepe raises disturbing questions. If people could build such things before farming even took root, what else might have existed that we have not yet found? Graham Hancock and other controversial writers argue that sites like Göbekli Tepe are the fingerprints of a lost civilization, one swept away at the end of the Ice Age and remembered only in myths of Atlantis or the Great Flood. Religious traditions echo similar ideas of worlds before our own. In the Abrahamic faiths, Adam and his descendants were city builders long before the Sumerians. In Hindu cosmology, humanity cycles through vast yugas, golden ages, and dark ages, implying that what we call the first civilization may only be the first in this current cycle. Islamic tradition speaks of civilizations of jinn before humans, beings who lived and built before our kind was created. Myths from around the world tell of floods that destroyed older worlds, of beings who came before, of knowledge passed down from vanished ages. So here we stand. Sumer is the official answer, but the controversy is real, the conflict sharp, the whispers of older ages too loud to ignore. The Egyptians claim their unity and pyramids put them first. The Indus Valley demonstrates a scale and order that rivals anything Sumer produced. China's dynasties push the timeline in a different direction. Göbekli Tepe explodes the timeline altogether, hinting at civilizations we cannot yet name. Religion insists that the story did not begin with Sumer at all, but with beings and ages long before. Maybe the truth is this: there was not one first civilization, but many. Some rose early and fell, erased by time. Some left voices we can read, others left only stones. Some remain locked in myth, waiting for us to uncover them. The question of the first civilization is not just about who built first, but about how fragile memory is, how easily entire worlds can vanish, leaving only fragments. This is only the beginning of the story. In the next part, we will step deeper into the world of Sumer itself, exploring its kings, its gods, its laws, and the controversies within its own history. But for now, we leave with this thought. The first civilization is not simply a date on a timeline. It is a mirror we hold up to ourselves, a way of asking who we are, where we came from, and whether we are truly as unique as we think. The cradle of civilization, as it is often called. A land of mud brick cities and clay tablets, of law codes and ziggurats, of gods who ruled through kings and kings who became gods in memory. But to call Sumer first is to open a hornet's nest of debates. Because while the evidence is strong, the story is anything but straightforward. Picture Mesopotamia around 4000 BCE. A stretch of fertile land between two violent rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. It wasn't a paradise. Floods could wipe away crops overnight. Droughts could starve entire regions. But it was this chaos, historians argue, that forced the people here to innovate. The earliest villages grew into towns. The towns became cities, and one of those cities, Uruk, would grow into what some call the first metropolis on Earth. By 3100 BCE, Uruk may have held 50,000 to 80,000 people. To put that in perspective, that's more than the population of London 4,000 years later. In Uruk, we find not just houses, but monumental architecture. The White Temple, raised on its platform, stood as a link between earth and heaven. The great ziggurat stair, stepped and massive, was a statement. The gods are above, but we will meet them halfway. Ziggurats would later inspire biblical tales like the Tower of Babel, humanity building up to the heavens in defiance or devotion. Archaeologist Harriet Crawford once remarked that Uruk was not simply a city, it was the embodiment of an entirely new way of living. But the true revolution of Sumer wasn't bricks, it was writing. Around 3200 BCE, the Sumerians began pressing symbols into clay tablets, cuneiform. At first, it was numbers and accounts, grain owed, goats counted, barley distributed. But quickly, writing expanded. By 2600 BCE, we find hymns, prayers, laws, even jokes. One tablet records the world's oldest written complaint, a customer furious at a merchant for delivering low-quality copper. Another lists proverbs that could have come from any modern self-help book. The good fortune that the mouth brings is more important than the gift of the hand. Samuel Noah Kramer, in his seminal History Begins at Sumer, counted over 30 firsts here. The first schools, the first legal disputes, the first epics. If civilization is about memory, about preserving knowledge beyond the life of one person, then Sumer wins by a landslide. And then there's the Epic of Gilgamesh. Written around 2000 BCE, it tells the tale of a king of Uruk who sought immortality, battled monsters, defied the gods, and failed to live forever. It includes a flood story eerily similar to Noah's Ark, complete with a man warned by a god to build a boat and save life from destruction. To many, this is evidence that Sumer's myths flowed into the Bible and beyond. To others, it's proof that oral traditions about ancient cataclysms, perhaps even the end of the Ice Age, echoed through millennia, written down first by the Sumerians. But here's where the conflict starts. Yes, Sumer had the first writing. Yes, it had cities and monumental architecture. But critics argue that Sumer may not have been first at all. Egypt's Narmer palette, dated to 3000 BCE, shows the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under a king. Hieroglyphics appear around the same time as cuneiform, perhaps independently invented, perhaps influenced. Meanwhile, archaeologists in China point to Jiahu symbols, scratched into tortoise shells around 6000 BCE. They're not full writing, but they hint at earlier traditions of symbolic communication. If writing is the metric, is it fair to say only Sumer counts? Then there's the issue of urbanization. Sites like Çatalhöyük in Anatolia, dating to 7000 BCE, had thousands of residents living in closely packed mud brick houses. No temples, no palaces, but a settlement large enough to rival later cities. Was Çatalhöyük a civilization? Or does the absence of writing disqualify it? Archaeologist Ian Hodder, who studied Çatalhöyük for decades, argued that calling Sumer first ignores these earlier complex societies. And even within Mesopotamia, Sumer wasn't alone. Neighboring cultures like the Elamites in present-day Iran and the Akkadians, who would later dominate Mesopotamia, shared, borrowed, and innovated alongside the Sumerians. The Akkadian Empire, founded by Sargon the Great around 2334 BCE, was the world's first multi-city empire. Some argue it was the true beginning of civilization as we know it, empires, bureaucracy, and central authority, not just city-states. But Sumer does have another claim, law. Around 2000 BCE, King Ur-Nammu of Ur wrote one of the world's earliest law codes. Centuries later, Hammurabi of Babylon would famously inscribe his own on stone, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But Ur-Nammu's code was softer, stressing fines and compensation rather than vengeance. It's a reminder that even in these first civilizations, law was not just about punishment, but about order, about defining society itself. Religion, too, shaped everything. The Sumerians believed the gods had literally created humans to be their servants, to feed them through offerings and rituals. Each city had its patron deity, Inanna for Uruk, Enlil for Nippur, Nanna for Ur. Wars were often justified as conflicts between gods. To modern readers, this may sound oppressive, but to the Sumerians, the gods gave meaning, order, and legitimacy to the fragile cities in a harsh land. Some historians argue that religion itself was civilization's engine, the glue that held thousands together. Others argue it was fear. Fear of chaos, fear of flood, fear of famine, that drove the Sumerians to invent gods in the first place. Here, religion and history clash. The Bible tells us that after the flood, people built a tower at Babel, often identified with a Sumerian ziggurat, and God scattered them for their pride. Islamic tradition speaks of earlier peoples destroyed for defying God, their ruins left as warnings. Hindu texts describe vast cycles where civilizations rise and fall over yugas, with no single first. To believers, Sumer was not the beginning. It was merely one chapter in a much older divine story. To historians, though, Sumer is where myth and record first merge. And then, the most controversial question, did Sumer really rise alone? Some, like Graham Hancock, argue that Sumer shows fingerprints of knowledge inherited from an earlier, forgotten civilization. The sudden appearance of writing, astronomy, advanced mathematics, and monumental building, they argue, is too much for one people to invent out of nothing. Hancock points to myths of flood survivors, like Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, or Oannes, the fishman sage said to have emerged from the sea to teach the Sumerians agriculture, writing, and law. To mainstream scholars, these are just myths. To alternative theorists, they are memories of survivors from an Ice Age civilization, passing down fragments of lost knowledge. So, was Sumer the first? According to the majority of archaeologists, yes. But even that, yes, is cautious. Because for every clay tablet, for every ziggurat, for every name etched into history, there are ruins, mounds, and artifacts scattered across the world that whisper of earlier beginnings. The debate is not just about who was first, it's about whether first is even the right question. By the time Sumer collapsed around 2000 BCE, invaded by Elamites and weakened by drought, their legacy was already set. Writing, law, literature, monumental architecture, city life, the template of civilization itself. Later cultures from Babylon to Greece to Rome would build on what the Sumerians started. And yet, the mystery remains. Were they truly first? Or just the first whose records we can still read? That is where the controversy burns brightest. Because if Sumer was first, then history is simple, a line from Uruk to us. But if not, if others came before, forgotten by time, then history is a cycle, and the first civilization may never be found. So far, we've traced the contest of beginnings. We've seen contenders rise in different corners of the world and watched Sumer make its case as the first. But if history teaches us anything, it's that there is never just one story. In fact, the question, who was first, may itself be flawed. Because as soon as we crown Sumer, Egypt steps forward with its monuments. The Indus Valley whispers with its buried cities. China claims its dynastic past, and Göbekli Tepe shatters every timeline we thought we understood. Let's start with Egypt, the land of pyramids, pharaohs, and hieroglyphs. Around 3100 BCE, King Nama united Upper and Lower Egypt, forming what some call the world's first nation-state. Unlike Mesopotamia's patchwork of city-states, Egypt was centralized from the beginning, ruled by divine kings who embodied gods on earth. Within centuries, Egypt raised the Great Pyramid of Giza, a structure so precise that its base deviates by less than 2 inches over 756 feet. To this day, we're not fully sure how it was built. Was Egypt first? In some ways, yes. If civilization means order, unity, and colossal monuments that stand for thousands of years, Egypt has a strong claim. But Egypt's writing hieroglyphs seems to have appeared slightly after cuneiform, and much of its early statecraft may have been influenced by ideas drifting up the Nile from Mesopotamia. So was Egypt original, or was it standing on Sumer's shoulders? Scholars still fight over that. Meanwhile, to the east, the Indus Valley civilization was quietly rewriting what a city could be. Around 2000 BCE, sites like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa emerged with populations of over 40,000. Their cities had straight streets laid out on grids, advanced drainage systems, standardized weights and measures, and even public baths. They traded as far as Mesopotamia, leaving seals with strange script that we still cannot read. The mystery of the Indus is its silence. They built no ziggurats, no pyramids, no colossal statues. They left no deciphered texts. And yet, in terms of sophistication, the Indus may have been ahead of everyone. Imagine a civilization with near-universal access to sanitation in 2500 BCE, something many European cities wouldn't achieve until the 19th century. Why don't we call the Indus Valley the first? Because without deciphered writing, we can't prove their chronology or their firsts. But some scholars argue that this is just bias. We privilege writing over other markers of complexity. If that's unfair, then maybe the Indus deserves the crown. Next, let's move to China. By 2000 BCE, the Xia dynasty was said to rule, though many historians doubt its existence. The first firm dynasty is the Shang, emerging around 1600 BCE, with cities, palaces, and the first Chinese writing carved on oracle bones. These scripts still connect to modern Chinese characters, creating the longest continuous written tradition in history. But China offers something else: legend, the story of the Yellow Emperor, the Dragon King who unified tribes, the tale of Yu the Great, who tamed the floods and founded the Xia dynasty. To believers, these are not myths but history, placing China's origins much earlier. Archaeological finds at Erla suggest a complex society around 1900 BCE, possibly the Xia. But whether the Xia was real or not, China's civilization rises independently, and that independence matters. If multiple regions invented civilization on their own, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Indus, China, then maybe there was no single first. Maybe humanity itself was destined to civilize. But what about places outside the Big Four? In the Americas, the Olmec civilization emerged around 1200 BCE, carving colossal stone heads and laying the groundwork for later Mayan and Aztec cultures. In Peru, Caral flourished around 2600 BCE with pyramids and complex trade. In Europe, the Minoans of Crete built palaces at Knossos around 2000 BCE with frescoes that still glow with color. And then there's the wild card, Göbekli Tepe. Discovered in Turkey in the 1990s, Göbekli Tepe dates back to 9600 BCE, 7,000 years before Sumer. Here stand massive T-shaped stone pillars arranged in circles, carved with animals and abstract symbols. No houses, no writing, no evidence of farming at first. Just monumental architecture. Archaeologist Klaus Schmidt called it the world's first temple. If that's true, it suggests that religion, not agriculture, came first. That humans gathered to worship, to share myth, to carve memory into stone, and only later settled down to farm. Göbekli Tepe throws every timeline into chaos. Was it a precursor to Sumer? Was it a different civilization, now forgotten? Or was it something else entirely? A sanctuary built by hunter-gatherers who never made it to the next stage? And then comes the most controversial question. What if we're asking the wrong question altogether? What if there were civilizations older than all of these, lost to floods, buried under rising seas, erased by time? The Greek philosopher Plato told the story of Atlantis, a mighty civilization drowned beneath the ocean. Hindu cosmology speaks of cities swallowed by the sea in earlier yugas. Off the coast of India, near Dwarka, underwater ruins suggest settlements thousands of years old. Off Cuba, sonar scans revealed what some claim are sunken structures. Most mainstream archaeologists dismiss these as natural formations, but the debate refuses to die. Writers like Graham Hancock argue that civilizations existed before the end of the Ice Age, 12,000 years ago, and that flood myths are their echo. To traditional scholars, this is speculation. To many, it's irresistible. So where does that leave us? Let's weigh the evidence. Sumer, first writing, first laws, first epic literature. Egypt, first nation-state, first monumental stone architecture. Indus Valley, first sanitation systems, urban planning on a massive scale. China, first continuous script and dynastic rule. Göbekli Tepe, first monumental ritual site, thousands of years before the rest. Each is first in something. Each reshapes the definition. The problem, perhaps, is our obsession with firsts. Human history is not a race with one winner. It's a mosaic. Civilizations rose, fell, and sometimes rose again, each carrying fragments of knowledge forward. What we call civilization is less a starting gun and more a chorus. Different voices, different notes, overlapping in time. And yet, the question remains, what was the world's first civilization? The safest answer is Sumer. The boldest answer is Göbekli Tepe. The most provocative answer is a lost civilization we haven't yet found. But maybe the better question is, why does it matter? Because in asking who was first, we ask who we are. Are we the heirs of a single ancient genius, or the descendants of countless small sparks across the globe? Did civilization begin once or many times? Was it inevitable or an accident? At the end of the day, the ruins whisper the same truth. Humanity has always been reaching for gods, for order, for memory, for immortality. From mud brick ziggurats to stone pyramids, from undeciphered seals to epic poems, from forgotten mounds to buried cities. The first civilizations remind us that the hunger to build, to remember, to mean something was always there. So, who was first? Maybe that's the wrong story. Maybe the real story is that civilization was never about being first. It was about being human.